Hello and good evening, everybody. I would like to welcome all of you to the launch of Gandhi, The End of Non-Violence by Manash Firaq Bhattacharjee, organized by the Nehru Centre. TNC is a fairly new organization. It was set up last year in September with the goal to reach out to public. We aim to bring the knowledge to a wider audience through articles, podcasts, events, and other forms of public communication. Our work is about engaging with the issues of our time, fighting misinformation, and encouraging a deeper understanding of India's evolving political, social, and economic landscape. We write and share articles, opinion pieces, and guest columns on current and historical events. We publish newsletters. We have launched a podcast series called The Voices of Reason. We also have another podcast series known as The Discovery of India. We are here today for the launch of the book, Gandhi, The End of Nonviolence. The book is not just a historical account, it is a raw, complex, and deep unsettling reality of Gandhi's last struggle. It is an account of the brutality of political ambition and the terrifying cost of a divided nation. You will hear more about the book from our esteemed panelists. We have with us Ashis Nandy, who would be chairing the session. Ashis Nandy is a sociologist, a clinical psychologist, and an author. His research interests center on the political psychology of violence, cultures of knowledge, human potentialities, and futures. Our speakers are Vinay Lal and Hilal Ahmed. Vinay Lal is an Indian historian and a professor at UCLA. He writes widely on the history and culture of colonial and modern India, popular and public culture in India, cinema, Gandhi, and the politics of knowledge systems. Hilal Ahmed works on political Islam, Indian democracy, and the politics of symbols in South Asia. He is an author and a professor at CSDS. Lastly, we have on the panel the author of the book himself, Manash Firaq Bhattacharjee, who is a writer, political thinker, and poet. Besides Gandhi, The End of Nonviolence, he has authored The Spirit of India, The Town Slowly Empties on Life and Culture During Lockdown, and many others.
I have never been able to handle Gandhi's life and his death. Somehow or other, I feel that he has been cheating me and avoiding me, and I have to reconstruct him over a period of time. Over the last 40, 50 years, these changes have come. Just to give an example, I was once told about a Gujarati school established in Calcutta. That's my city. I was at least. By two Gujarati brothers. Now, it was all very good. I was taken to see the house of the big school and so on and so forth. It is a normal school, nothing much to talk about, so on and so forth. But I noticed a tablet on the school that said that this school was inaugurated by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru on such and such date. Now this was surprising because at that time Gandhi was coming to Calcutta virtually every month or something or other. Couldn't have asked Gandhi to inaugurate the school. It's a Gujarati school. teaching Gujarati mostly to the Gujaratis families in Calcutta. Uh, so, what's wrong with it? Could have easily told Gandhi to open that. So, uh, so he said, this younger brother said that my brother said that if Jawaharlal Nehru comes, he will inaugurate the school, give an excellent lecture, which we will print and not forget. Yeah. And after all, he's a busy man. He will go away and forget all the school. Now, we are Gujaratis. Our first thought was that Gandhi should inaugurate the school. But then I thought, the elder brother says, so then I thought that Jawaharlal Nehru will give a very good lecture, probably much better than Gandhi. But after that, Gandhi will, if you call Gandhi, allow Gandhi to inaugurate it, then every week or at most every month, you will get at least 2-3 letters are you giving food, milk to the children in the school? How much milk you are giving and how frequently? And this kind of questions begin to come to us, and we cannot handle it constantly with that kind of thing. So I thought it is safer to invite Jawaharlal Nehru. So there is this other part of the Gandhi, this other, which I think in one sense very interesting, that he always has a way of sticking to the smallest issues. Some of the letters, if you read of his, often it has ended in two words or three lines. And the other person has written a huge long letter. And actually, sometimes the answer looks like a attempt to not respond to the really correspondence of what he wants to know. No, sometimes he would say, oh, this is, you can also read the Dharmasastras and get them yourself. Whatever is your religion is, you can do. If you are a Christian, then so on and so forth. Read the Bible. If you are a Muslim, you read whatever Islamic texts are there, and so on and so forth, Quran. No. So there is this part of the thing that is always there. So I have a feeling that he is a very difficult person to capture. Even after his death, I was going to, I'm very impressed by that. Even after his death, Gandhi has become, in some ways, a real trigger.
It is always great to be in the company of Ashis, Vinay, Manash, and friends. As I said that I'm not a Gandhi scholar, and it's actually a privilege to be, and I'm glad that this book was given to me to respond to some of the issues which Manash has raised. Uh, but I find a few problems, and I think following Gandhi's technique, it would be honest for me to share my uneasiness with you so that we can have some open discussion on the book. Why? So first and foremost is that author is a very careful reader. If you read the book, you find that he's very, very careful. He reads a text like a detective. But he's a poet also. So he is very playful with words and expressions. So on the one hand, you have got an author who is a very good reader, a detective, and he has a tremendous command over words and expression. On the other hand, there is a subject, Gandhi, who is full of inconsistencies, and he celebrates his inconsistencies. And not merely celebrating his inconsistencies, he is also someone who comes to us, like what Ashis said, that he is actually as if cheating us. He is with us. And that provokes my interest in Gandhi. As I said, that I'm not a Gandhi scholar, but somehow I find that he is making sense to me. He is someone who is relevant. I don't know why, but gradually I am actually, in my own intellectual work, I move towards him. So that's the first difficulty. An author who would like to break conventions of writing, and a subject who is full of contradiction and who is celebrating his inconsistencies. Now, as a reader, I thought that I should find out a solution. And the solution which I present to you is this, that I read this book not merely as an interpretation of Gandhi, but as an invitation to engage with a particular phase of his life, as a point of departure to ask a few important questions of our contemporary public life, some of the questions which are actually underlined by Ashis in a very beautiful manner. I'll come back to these questions later, but first of all, this is the method which I applied to read this beautiful book. By the way, it's a beautifully written book. As a text, you will enjoy. You just get it, and then you can't stop yourself finishing in one sitting. Okay, so in that case, I think Manash's book is raising three crucial dilemmas. By the way, the period he has chosen, mid-40s, is very important because it is a period of uncertainties and chaos. And in this chaos and uncertainties, there are three things which he is actually raising. Again, he does not want to number them because he would like to break all the frameworks, and is very critical of the idea of framework itself. But as a reader, I'm free to extract what I find useful in it, and I find three dilemmas. The first dilemma, which I call the dilemma of institutional framing. And in my view, the question he is asking is how to produce at that point of time. Everybody was, by the way, fortunately, I'm not a historian. I'm a political scientist by training, and it has given me some kind of an advantage to look at history, the distinction he's making in the book, past and history, in my own ways. So if that is the case, then in this particular period of chaos and uncertainties, there is first dilemma, the dilemma of institutional framing. And he, in my view, and this is my reading, everybody is talking about how to produce a modern institutional blueprint which can accommodate sociological diversity of India without, and this without is important, diverting from the framework offered by the colonial state since 1909. So you have a framework already, but you have to think afresh. And Indian subjects are invited to be part of as a stakeholder in this thinking process. So that's the first dilemma, which everyone is dealing with at that point of time, and the book captures that very beautifully. The second dilemma is, which I called political intellectualism. And I think here he makes a significant contribution in our understanding of how to establish a crucial link between political ideas and political happenings, something which is actually needed at the moment. Why? Because, and that's the question again, everybody is talking about that, how to produce intellectual argument at a time when the pace of politics has increased in an unprecedented manner. In 40s, the speed of politics is very fast. But the intellectual ideas are not moving in that manner. So you have got established frameworks in your mind. Every big actor is involved, but they are finding it difficult to cope with the pace which is there in the 40s. So how to actually synthesize or produce the set of ideas which can not merely make sense of the pace of politics, but also remain futuristic in their entirety. So that is another dilemma which everybody is dealing with, and particularly Gandhi. The third dilemma is the dilemma of mass politics. We know this, that how to control the masses who had been shaped over the years to do agitational politics in a specific manner. Now you have made the national movement a mass movement, and not merely Congress, but the others, Muslim League. So everyone is part and parcel of something called nationalism. Look at the films of the 40s, Dur Hato Duniya Alu Vagara Vagara. And in these films, it appears to us that nationalism is the accepted norm of doing politics. If that is the case, then everybody is nationalist. So how to control, which you have rose over the years, how to control those? And it will go in different directions. So the violence which we encounter, which he captured, is also an outcome of that dilemma. Now, Manash's book is actually looking at Gandhi's response to these challenges, and in my view, he introduces us to he gives us two clues. The first clue is this, and this is something which is actually, this is a critical point which I would like to make so that we can have some kind of a engaged discussion with him. Gandhi made a sincere effort, because non-violence is something which is central to Gandhian thinking, Satyagraha and non. And in this time when he is facing these three very interesting and very powerful dilemmas, he is forced to offer a new interpretation of the idea of non-violence. By the way, we all know that he celebrates his inconsistencies, so therefore it is not surprising for us that he is also trying to change the contour of the notion of non-violence itself in this particular 2 years which he mapped in a systematic manner. What we find that unlike in the 20s and 30s, the focus of Gandhian politics on mass mobilization. And in this particular phase, what we find that non-violence is strategically and rather powerfully defined as an internal quest. He has been talking about non-violence as an internal quest, but at this particular time, it is something which is internalized in a different way, and Gandhi reinvented himself as a symbol. Now that's a very important point which is coming out in 3 chapters. One is Noakhali, another in Delhi, etc. So here he realized that now he has to reinvent himself as a symbol. So Gandhi as a person and Gandhi as a symbol. So it's a merger that is taking place at that very point of time. And the Brahmacharya experiment, which you have talked about, is something which underlines that fact, the fact that if Gandhi would like to reinvent himself, there is a need to reinvent the idea of body itself. So the entire debate, or whatsoever he has captured beautifully, again, like a detective. So on the one hand, you have a Gandhian code and then the Manu's diary. It's a beautifully, constructed narrative in which the body of Gandhi became very powerful and important figure. Now, here, I think Manash missed a point. Because when Gandhi is doing Brahmacharya experiment, the figure of eunuch is coming time and again, and particularly in Noakhali. And if you look at prayer meetings in Delhi as well in 1947, this figure of eunuch is very powerful. And I think, whenever you have touched upon in your essay on Noakhali as well, but I find that figure, and he is raising that issue very powerfully in relation to the Muslim public of Noakhali. The Muslim would, and he said, it's a courageous statement to make. And he said that I would like to become Prophet's eunuch. And he said that And there are very few hadiths which are dedicated to Prophet Sunak. But he was fully aware of those, and he used it in a context which is actually predominantly Muslim context of Noakhali. So therefore, that is also an important point which he is making. What he is doing at that point of time is basically to dehistoricize Islam and demystifying the figure of the Prophet, which is, I think, if you could have done it, that it would give more power to your own argument. The second clue is about Gandhi's understanding of complex political trajectories, and this is the final point which I would like to make. Gandhi is not someone who is not a realist. He understands the real world politics. So he's not a, Majburi ka naam type. He's someone who has a great understanding of politics. And I think then, he knew that his political vision had been clearly rejected even by the Congress leaders. He also aware that violence as a tool of politics has already been legitimized by the competing political ideologies even before partition, yet he did not want to give up the notion of ahimsa. If this is the case, then there is a point which I would like to make, and this is something which is very important for us to understand at the moment. In my own little bit of writing which I have done on Gandhi, I find, and again taking it from Ashis, we have got three different images of Gandhi. One is Sarkari Gandhi, which you can find on Swachhta Abhiyan. Second is Majboor Gandhi, which you find in Munna Bhai series. But third is a Siyasi Gandhi, which one is a very political, etc. And that's why from Chhattisgarh Mukti Morcha to Narmada Bachao Andolan, Gandhi is reinvented. He is a fellow traveler. He is someone who is offering us a toolkit of doing Satyagraha. So he is the one who invented the idea of toolkit. I think he must be, held responsible for giving this idea of toolkit of protest. But Gandhi, as I said, if we take this final clue from Gandhi, I think we have to realize that the idea of protest in contemporary India has reached to a saturation point. Gandhi was fully aware of that fact in 1946-47. Because he was not talking about protest, instead he was talking about networking. So I think if we would like to understand the contemporary moment of our politics, it is very important that we should just, again going back to what he said about Satyagraha, just stop ourselves and first think of creating coalition and network, and then think of the idea of protest. Thank you very much.
Good evening, friends. Let me begin by saying that we're all aware that there is a very large literature on Gandhi, which shows no signs of diminishing. And I can't tell you how refreshing it has been for me to read this book, which is a rather large work, and not once have encountered the word relevance. Because every book that's written on Gandhi will typically tell you something about the relevance of Gandhi. And the government of India, of course, specializes in holding seminars on the relevance of Gandhi. The purpose of each such seminar is to dig Gandhi further and further into a hole from which he cannot be extricated. This book is a very unusual work in the massive annals of Gandhian literature that we have. It is not a book to which you come from a discipline. If you're thinking of yourself as a historian or as a political scientist or a philosopher, and you come to this book, the book will not speak to you in the registers in which it really resonates. Because it's a work which shows scant respect, and rightfully so, for things like disciplinary boundaries. You don't read a biography of Gandhi by Ram Gua and expect that you're going to encounter some kind of serious engagement with the work of Levinas or Aristotle or Derrida. Now, this is the kind of book which has that. It also has a narrative history. There's also an engagement with stories by Manto. or a invocation to V.S. Naipaul, a very interesting one, which I won't get into at the moment. So it's a book that's to be read and simply reflected upon. I have a very different approach to this book, and I'm trying to indicate why that might be the case. Let us begin with the dedication of this book, all right? And remember, it's Gandhi, the end of nonviolence, and so there is also an epigram which follows the dedication, and which I'll read out as well, so that we can understand exactly what it is that we are being asked to reflect upon. And as been mentioned by Hilal, the subject matter of the book, if you want to think of it that way, is in particular the last 18 months of Gandhi's life, beginning with, if I may put it this way, if I had to put a chronology, because I think it should be said bluntly, Manash is willing to take on a great many people in this work. There's a lot of risk-taking in this book, all right? And so in a sense, you could say the 18 months begin with Direct Action Day, 1946, August, and the 18 months end effectively with the assassination of Gandhi on 30th January 1948. Now, of course, if you look at the first part of the book, which is a very long kind of, preface, where you'll find that he has a discussion. I think that's in some ways, some portions of it, the least satisfying part of it, but he has a discussion where he takes in serial order people like Shravanand, Dayanand, Aurobindo, Savarkar, Ambedkar, etc., and just try to see what each of these really had to say on the subject of nonviolence, violence, and Gandhi, broadly speaking, all right? But as I said, let's just begin for a second with the dedication, because the book is dedicated to the dog watching over its caregivers' skeletons in Noakhali. And in order to understand what this dedication is, you'll eventually have to get to page 60 of the book. And here, this is page 60, not of the Roman numerals, because that preface runs to over 100 pages, but the Arabic numerals. And this is, let me read the passage. And this is one way to get into the book and to its spirit, and then get into the ideas that Manash is flirting around with. I think flirting is not a bad word, because if you're really engaging with Derrida and Levinas and Aristotle and a great many people, and unless you know exactly what you're doing, and even when you think you know exactly what you're doing, there's always a risk that you're getting into terrain which really needs constant interpretation and reinterpretation, right? So here is the anecdote, and there is a wonderful gift of storytelling here too in this book, all right? So there is an unforgettable scene, he says, described by Pyare Lal after Gandhi emerged from inspecting a ruined building, and this is during his walk in Noakhali. And at least from the standpoint of a Gandhi Bhakt, I describe myself as one, and I think I would say that Manash is one too. He might want to disavow that, but this book is an unabashed defense of Gandhi, and I think rightfully so once again. Okay? Especially when we consider the choices we have before us in this country, and we have to look at those last 18 months as an extraordinary epic, within which there was the epic of Noakhali. That alone is an epic which is of a scale that is really quite extraordinary. And he is able to convey some of that, I think, beautifully and adequately. And one of the other things that Hilal mentioned was that there is another major character that emerges from this book, a character who's often sidelined in the literature, and that's Manu. And of course there, Manu is a witness, and then of course you have to really think about what witnessing means. Where does the idea of witnessing emerge from? We would generally attach it, I would say, to the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? But there are various ways in which Manu's witnessing is another kind of epic that gets us into the story of Noakhali. So here is the anecdote. A Tibetan spaniel that was always seen roaming about the place in mournful silence came along and with a soft whimper tried to attract his attention. It would run a few steps, turn back and again beckon if it was not followed. Gandhiji's companions were mystified by the strange behavior of the animal and wanted to drive it away. Gandhiji stopped them and said, quote, "Don't you see the animal wants to say something to us?" End quote. He let the dog lead him. It brought him to 3 human skeletons, one after another, and several skulls and bones that lay scattered all over the ground. It had seen its master and 7 other members of the family being done to death during the riots. Ever since, it had hovered about the place and tried to bring to light the dark deed to which it had been witness. So recall what the dedication was, right? The dedication is to the dog watching over its caregiver's skeletons in Noakhali. But now let us get into Manash's commentary on this. The scandal of genocide, he says, is reflected in the animal tormented by the destruction of human life. A dog was in an animal state. A dog was in an animal state of shock, having witnessed human violence. And you think it's almost tautological because the dog was in an animal state, as if you said if a human is in an animal state, right, what would it mean for a dog to be in an animal state? That is its being, that is its ontology, right? A dog was in an animal state of shock, having witnessed human violence. There was nothing human about the dog's traumatized condition, but there was something animal about the human violence the dog witnessed, right? You know that one of the things that has now become quite common in the academy, especially in the US, is animal studies. And my submission to you would be that once you've read this, you'll understand that the only way to do animal studies is to study the human, right? Which is not what they do in animal studies. There was nothing human about the dog's traumatized condition, but there was something animal about the human violence the dog witnessed. It is permissible to animalize certain human actions, but you can't humanize animal sensibility. The animal alone is common to the animal and the human, while the human is either a possibility or a violent intrusion. It was possible for Kafka to imagine being a dog in his famous short story, Investigations of a Dog, but a dog can't imagine being Kafka, right? Now you see the tenor of the commentary, right? Because this is where you see really the play of ideas, which is, I think, what makes this work distinct. And you know, when you play with ideas, you don't worry about whether you're right all the time. You don't worry about certainty. In fact, there is, this itself is a way of engaging with the question of inconsistencies in which Gandhi himself reveled. Because what did he say? When he was asked, you know, you said something at one point and you said something at one point, he said, well, that's the nature of truth. If you continue to have the same position, how can you possibly be describing yourself as in pursuit of truth? Right? So I find that this work is extraordinarily rich in the way in which it handles both philosophy, narrative history, the way in which handles the whole question of what I would call the idea of play. It's really a testament to that. Now, what is it that might be, I'm going to take up a couple of other things and then end very briefly on just a set of reflections on what it means to write about Gandhi in this vein. But let us first consider a couple of other things that come to mind. And one of the things that comes to mind when I'm thinking about what he's writing over here is the fact that Manash takes on very seriously the whole question which was extremely dear to Gandhi. And that was a question of Hindu-Muslim unity. Now, I think that, there is a position that has become, and what I'm going to say here is certainly going to be a provocation for some people, but there's a position that has now become common in the Indian left especially. And that position, of course, is to say that, look, whatever it is that one might accuse, let's say, one community of doing, it is certainly the case that that community had no monopoly, okay, on that kind of violence. So, for example, if you think about the destruction of the Babri Masjid, well, one of the arguments that was put forward by historians on the left was that, all right, let's even concede for a moment, hypothetically, that yes, that this mosque was built by destroying a Hindu temple. And then what is the argument given after that? The argument is that, but yes, Hindus did exactly the same thing. They destroyed Buddhist stupas. They destroyed Jain temples. Right? And there is, of course, a whole idea of spoliage or spoliation. That is that you actually take the rubble of other buildings, you take the rubble of the past, metaphorically, to build the present. But you take the rubble of these and then you build a new structure. All right? Now, his position is that we have to be very clear, and I think on this question, I think he's going to invite unquestionably some criticism. It's not my position that he has a difficulty, that I find his position difficult, but I'm suggesting that he will, I think Manash will invite some criticism on this point, that he's very clear that if you're really looking at the tenor of Hindu-Muslim relations, and you're particularly looking at it from the lens of Gandhi, that there is no question, for example, that if you look at Direct Action Day, just as one illustration, that we have to hold Jinnah and the Muslim League primarily responsible for it. He's unequivocally clear about it. And one of the things that he keeps on arguing in this book is that there are various ways in which it has become now almost difficult to make claims of this kind, because these are always going to have to be disguised in the form of quid pro quo, that, well, maybe someone did this, maybe people of the other community did it as well. I think Manash's position is very clear that if you're really looking at the question of Hindu-Muslim unity, and we have to say that Gandhi was the one who worked most actively in promoting it. And what he does here is he takes, for example, something like the Khilafat issue, because I pick on the Khilafat issue not only because he talks about it at some length, but I think that it is generally conceded, I'm not willing to make that concession, but it's generally conceded that if we had to think of a time when Gandhi was in the wrong, it was on the Khilafat issue. Right? And one of the things that he does then is, of course, he invokes people like Levinas and Derrida to suggest that we have to understand what is the nature of friendship. Was Gandhi advocating for Khilafat because he was expecting something in return from the Muslims? And what is that something? Most of the literatures will say that something was a pledge by the Muslims that they would honor the ban on cow slaughter, just as an illustration. And Manash's position, which is a position that I wholeheartedly embrace, and again, he would obviously be within his rights to contest my own understanding of what he's saying, but the position here is that no, there was no such exchange at all implied in Gandhi's embrace of the Khilafat movement. Because we then have to understand the nature of sentiment. We have to understand the nature of friendship. We have to understand the nature of gift. And I can't here elaborate upon all of these at great length, but this is exactly what he does in this book, is that he actually delves into these questions at considerable length to come up with readings which, as I said, will unquestionably offer something of a provocation to most readers, right? Including those who swear by Ambedkar, because he has some critical comments, I would say, on Ambedkar's understanding of Gandhi and his representation of Gandhi's views on a number of questions. All right? Let me conclude on this note, that whatever differences one may have with the author's reading of, let's say, the question of Hindu-Muslim unity, or what transpired during the great Calcutta killings, all right? Or how is it that the partition of India has been written upon, right? So, for example, one of the historians he boldly takes on is Joy Chatterjee, and one of the reasons he does so is because he sees Joy as coming really from a certain kind of, you know, how should I put it, elite Bengali kind of background, someone who's really unable to understand fundamentally actually the nature of mass politics and understand the tenor of Gandhi's thought. All right? So, you know, you'll see that he has these kinds of engagement with Indian historiography as well. But whatever one's views on all of these matters, I want to return to the larger point that I'd made. That I think that what is really most compelling about this work is that it succeeds very well in taking you into the worldview of Mohandas, Karamchand Gandhi, in those 18 extraordinary months when Gandhi set out first on an epic march through Noakhali, and then of course he had to go to Bihar, because we know that what happened, there were killings in Bihar. Then he had to go to Calcutta, and of course eventually he wound up in Delhi. Right? I have seen very few books which have been able to take us into those 18 months with this kind of heat, this kind of passion, right? And heat is not a misplaced word here, because, for example, one of the many things that concerns him, and this is where he brings in one of the lesser known stories of Manto. This is not one of those 4 or 5 stories, the only 4 or 5 stories that people read by Manto usually, and then they say they've read Manto, right? Toba Tek Singh and Kholdo and, 2 or 3 other stories. But this is one of the lesser known stories of Manto. And one of the things that Manto was trying to understand in this particular story, I won't tell you the name of the story, you read the book and you'll find out, all right? One of the things that Manto was trying to understand was, how do you actually think about the heat of that moment which makes a man engage in such acts of violence, right? And how do you distinguish that from the person who just sits at a desk and signs the death warrant for tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands? And of course, that was what led Hannah Arendt to that phrase, the banality of evil, which has now become the most banal phrase in the English language, I think, right? Because that's what she was really referring to, was that there are those people who actually pull the trigger, and then there are those meek-looking men, usually bespectacled, sitting at a table writing the orders, right? But where's the heat there? There's no heat. So in the heat of the moment, you do something, and then you sit back and you sort of think about what it is that you've done. You see, right? And of course, this is one of the various ways in which he then connects these killings with what was happening elsewhere in the world. Because, if you're talking about 1946, you're just talking about the aftermath of World War II. You're talking about the aftermath of the atomic bombings, of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and you're talking about the aftermath of the discovery of the concentration camps. The death camps, I should say, rather, you see, right? And so this book is an invitation really to think about, for me, if I use that word that Hilal used, there are no dilemmas here. There are certain kinds of questions that you simply think about, because this book is an invitation to really enter into the question of violence and non-violence, both in the minutiae, at the micro level, and at the largest philosophical abstract level. And I think that that's a great credit to the author. Thank you.
I would like to thank the Nehru Centre for giving this space. Hello? Yeah. Okay. I want to thank the Nehru Centre for giving this space for the launch and discussion of my book, particularly Mr. Sandeep Dixit. He was very warm and spontaneous when I spoke to him, and thanks to the entire Nehru Centre team, particularly Mihika also, with whom we have shared, all the details and everything. And I'm very glad that Ashis could come and be part of this discussion. And I was lucky that Professor Vinay Lal is in town, and I've known him only recently, but he has been very warm and encouraging. The program was actually perhaps not possible without Hilal's help, and Hilal actually ensured that this program happened, and he has been a friend and interlocutor in the last couple of years that we have known each other. So, and thank you all for being here, and thanks to all of you for coming and being part of this event today. I'll just share a few things. I mean, there's nothing to share about the book. I think Hilal and Vinay has spoken enough about the book, and it's for me actually time to learn from others and from readers about what they think about the book. But what I can do is I can say probably a few things behind the book and a few things around the book, just to give you an impression of maybe where I'm coming from. So let me begin by saying that this was actually last week. I was sitting alone in this at this cafe in this mall, and I was having tea, and I suddenly thought, this question struck me: why actually I ended up working on Gandhi and Nehru for my MPhil and PhD, when there were many other things that I could have also worked on. Our professor Rajiv Bhargav, with whom we worked, I mean, he taught us normative political philosophy and theory, and there were many other concerns that we were taught. But somewhere, I think maybe partly because of my personal background, my father being a refugee from East Bengal, and I've heard a lot of stories from him, and also because I was growing up in Assam during the late 70s, the whole so-called anti-foreigners agitation. So having witnessed all of that, I think maybe I was always intrigued by the idea and the question of the nation. I was also having constant conversation with friends who were also pretty perturbed, and we were discussing passionately about what is this nation beast, and how do we really deal with it, how are we connected within the nation, and so many questions. So I think for Nehru, the question was simple. We did this course on Indian nationalism, and later I heard that this was probably the first time that Indian nationalism was taught in our center in JNU. And I think the discovery of India really had me. I think I was very fascinated by the text, and I thought it would be a good way to, a good entry point into, thinking and writing about nation and nationalism. But about Gandhi, I wasn't very sure, because I thought I was very intrigued by Hind Swaraj, and I found the text quite interesting. I also found the autobiography interesting, though I could not maybe fully relate to the autobiography, and I would have maybe wondered about how to really tackle, or do a sort of a theoretical reading on autobiography. Maybe I wasn't very equipped enough to think so much on that, particularly in relation to that text. And then it struck me in a flash that there was this one text which we did in some course, where I was asked to critically review and discuss this text in the classroom. And I think that text intrigued me so much, it stayed with me, and today I'm actually pretty sure that somewhere behind my interest in Gandhi, that text was fundamentally responsible. And that text is The Intimate Enemy. And I want to say something about the intimate enemy at the end of my presentation, but I think this was the text that I think really helped me. And there is something I think that the intimate enemy does about Gandhi that I don't think any text, any other text that I've read, so many good scholarly texts on Gandhi, I think there's something that the intimate enemy does that no other text, at least in my reading, has been able to do, in terms of how I somewhere I think look at Gandhi as a figure. Then to come back to this largest question of scholarship around Gandhi, till the 1990s, I think we have mostly had positive readings of Gandhi, texts and scholars were engaging with Gandhi in terms of just giving us, very precise definitions or descriptions about what is satyagraha, what is satya, and what is ahimsa, and so on. But critical scholarship was not perhaps available, in too many texts, at least in English, or at least from whatever I have read. I remember maybe, for instance, Partha Chatterjee's essay on Gandhi. That was a critical essay, very dense, though I started disagreeing with it pretty soon, but that was a very interesting text for me as provocation. And there was also, people like, scholars like Shahid Amin wrote, some critical work on Gandhi. But apart from some critical work, mostly they were positive readings. More interesting, perhaps sophisticated reading started coming from the 2000s, and two works, if I mention in passing, one is Ajay Skaria's work on unconditional equality, and then there was Faisal Devji's work. I learnt a lot and used a lot of Faisal's work because it was really connected with the context that I was working on, which is the Hindu-Muslim question vis-a-vis Gandhi. And Faisal's book is absolutely brilliant, and I was very fascinated by this book. I think clearly one of the most sophisticated and brilliant works on Gandhi. In fact, when I met Ashis and told him that I'm writing this book, the first thing he asked me at IIS was, "Have you read Faisal Devji's book?" And when I said yes, I have, then he seemed to be, feeling good at, okay, now, I'll read somewhere about this book. So it was nice to know that even Ashita thought very well about this book. So, so there are 2-3 issues that I've had with, largely with Gandhian scholarship, both critical or otherwise, and I want to spell them out because these problems are the problems I wanted to stay away from, and which is why I approached this subject in my book, from a different perspective. So one of the things that to make a slightly crude, kind of a critical remark, that for me, I never could assume, I could not make that assumption that, for instance, that a Marxist theorist, an elite Marxist theorist, would understand the peasantry and the working class better than Gandhi would have done, So this was something that, I thought about when I read some of these critical works. The other thing I also thought was that, for instance, if you remember Partha Chatterjee's, work on Gandhi, where he questions and he brings up this question, which is a very straightforward thing about Gandhi's religious morality. Now, yes, I mean, the way he presents the case, the way he pulls up certain quotes and tells you that, this is, there's this deep religious morality. So Gandhi's morality is religious, and this is the religious morality that Gandhi is coming from. Well, I'll give you a small example to pose vis-a-vis this comment, because it also happens that when you don't look at Gandhi contextually and make these very larger remarks, they mostly end up misleading people than really, bringing us to a much more complicated and sophisticated understanding. So, for instance, both in Noakhali and in Bihar, Gandhi wants the perpetrators to confess. But he is not telling the perpetrators to go and confess to God. He is telling perpetrators in Noakhali to come and confess to him and his associate, who's another Bengali Hindu. And in Bihar, he is telling the Hindu perpetrators to come and confess to him and his Muslim associate. So here is Gandhi in a very, very intensely, grim situation, telling people to confess, and yet not confess to God, but confess to people. So what can be more secular than this idea of morality? That in this sort of a moment, Gandhi is telling people to come and confess to other people and not to God. So these are the kind of problems that I've had with these kind of readings, because there is a lot of ideological straitjacket in reading Gandhi. The other problem that I have, and I have this problem even with the sophisticated works that I'm talking about, which I've learned a lot from. One is this epistemological anxiety about Gandhi, that whether it's conceptual or it's linguistic, but it seems that that you have to get Gandhi right. That, and also it is about knowledge. That you want to that to approach Gandhi is to have more knowledge about Gandhi. Now, I think I was not interested in the problem of knowledge or the question of knowledge vis-a-vis Gandhi. Knowledge is not what I was seeking when I was reading Gandhi and trying to understand what he's doing. Also because this tendency, I think, comes into our academic thinking, because we tend to end up reading Indian political thinkers like the way we read Western political thinkers. But there's a huge gap between, and there's a huge difference between modern Western political thinkers and Indian political thinkers. Here these people are not systematic thinkers, and writing and speaking is part of their activity. It is an integrative act, and that's how we should perhaps read them. And also the other problem, which in many of these sophisticated works also have, is to read, is to try to tie up Gandhi's principles across time. This is a temporally overarching sort of approach to join everything together and then give you a certain idea about this is what Satyagraha is for Gandhi, this is what Ahimsa means. This I think has a problem, because in each context different things are happening, and since Gandhi himself said that if you want to understand my ideas, go and see my practice. But it is not only just practice, it is also these very intensely political encounters that he's making, where I think this whole thing is coming. So so I don't think that Gandhi's ideas can only come from reading Gandhi's ideas, and Gandhi's thoughts are not just Gandhi's coming from this very removed part of Gandhi's thinking. It is constantly coming from this engagement that he's making, and that's where it's most fascinating. And also there's this problem of contradiction, which I won't go into, but in short, which I've tackled in the book, that I don't read the difference between thought and action as something contradictory from a rationalist perspective, because this is a natural and inevitable contradiction between thought and action, and there is nothing to read about it really, because it is all finally coming together in what I call the encounter. And and my way of reading Gandhi has been to treat his thought and action put together as the encounter. And it is in the moment of encounter that we actually encounter Gandhi. We encounter the whole figure. And here again, the whole question is not an interest in epistemology, but it is, what is most interesting is what Gandhi is doing. He is constantly confronting and meeting people, and he's saying things right at that moment about what he feels about what's going on right then. That, I think, is giving us more clue about Satyagraha. The fact that I'm saying, somewhere he's ill and he's lying on a table and he's given these bags. That's Satyagraha. Like the crumbling body of Gandhi is Satyagraha. It is not, something that is saying some, and then it is constantly being abstracted in our works of theory. And this is also something, that has happened with Gandhi in particular, that the historical part is often kept out, and the theoretical part gets overemphasized. That is again something which is the problem, I think, of a certain academic training, that we are constantly trying to theorize more than getting into what the raw historical detail and the empirical detail is telling us. And there I think, we can take various directions. The direction does not have to be particularly theoretical. This is something I have a problem with, particularly in relation to the literature on partition that I have read, that in about such a grim and difficult moment in history, I find, many of these very, very well-known and respected historians are actually having an ideological anxiety to explain what went wrong during partition. I find that very distressing, because I don't think, your ideological anxieties need to bother so much about what really went wrong during partition. I think there is something else that is happening during partition. There has been mass suffering, and how do you deal with suffering? So if I don't find an iota of mourning in your work, I don't know what is your theory, doing in trying to understand the suffering of people's lives. So these are some of the questions which confronted me while reading all the scholarship on Gandhi, and that's where I think when I read the primary material of my work, I thought I am going to keep disciplines and theories, behind me, and they can come and go wherever they appear. But I want to just get and feel the subject that I'm talking about, and this is how largely I've written this book. So I won't talk much about this book anymore, and I guess I've shared a few things with you. I want to finally end with this point on the intimate enemy that I had said in the beginning, and I want to end with that. So there is this quotation. I'll quote this paragraph from the intimate enemy and say a couple of things about it, and I think it relates very closely to my work as well. So this is the quote. Gandhi's partiality for some of the Christian hymns and biblical texts was more than the symbolic gesture of a Hindu towards a minority religion in India. It was also an affirmation that at one place, some of the recessive elements of Christianity were perfectly congruent with elements of Hindu and Buddhist worldviews, and that the battle he was fighting for the minds of men, that's what Ashis Nandy writes, was actually a universal battle to rediscover the softer side of human nature, the so-called non-masculine self of man relegated to the forgotten zones of the Western self-concept. What was the constituency he was speaking to? Was it only a lunatic fringe or an ineffective minority? I suspect that there was in Gandhi not only a sophisticated ethical sensitivity, but also political and psychological shrewdness. I think a whole book can be written on this from this paragraph. And I think that a lot of the ethical sensitivity that Ashis Nandy is talking about, I would like to believe that that my book tries to address that question, where I think Nandy has managed to say something very unique about Gandhi in this book, which no other book, or maybe fewer, some other book might have captured, which is, I think, this point that that our approach towards Gandhi cannot be historical, merely historical rationalist, because Gandhi spirit is a very anti-historical spirit. To talk about non-violence in the middle of a violent 20th century is anti-historical. And it is also against this grain of history that he's writing. So I think this whole question of the psychological aspect that Nandi has, highlighted in that book really comes across very strongly. And I also believe that Gandhi is, not just a sign in the sense that he is not fully representable, but he's also a trace. And I've always believed that the traceable Gandhi always comes across best maybe in that sketch we find, where Gandhi is walking away from us with that stick, and he's walking away into the horizon of the oblivion. That's the kind of trace that I think Gandhi leaves behind. And Gandhi is absurd, Gandhi is haunting, and I think those people who admire Gandhi and those people who hate Gandhi somewhere I think are very very close, and they get the same thing. And it is also interesting that today we are very soon this film is going to come upon us, where it's a very different sort of journey which completely cancels this sort of approach towards Gandhi, because if there is something about Gandhi which is present in our unconscious, what is it? And I think the intimate enemy answers this question. And in the end, I would say, there was thinking about these things. I felt as if Gandhi is a kind of this, some chip or some microchip that is in our heads, and whether people who hate him or who admire him, they carry this chip in their heads. I think the intimate enemy felt that chip, and I think that book, if you read, it also puts a chip in your head. And I feel after listening to me, if you didn't have that chip in your head before, you'll have it from now. Thank you.